It's been a bad week for Russia. A very bad week, with one piece of awful news after another for the country's president, Vladimir Putin, to wake up to and deal with. The country is suffering dramatic economic turmoil, record loss of life, humiliating military defeats, and more. It might be even enough to make Vladimir seriously start to think about abandoning his invasion plans altogether, or at least to become more willing to negotiate a fair and reasonable ceasefire agreement. Here's a closer look at how and why this past week has been the worst of the war so far from the Russian perspective. Undoubtedly, the biggest bit of bad news Russia has seen in recent days came on June 1st, when Ukraine launched its largest and most successful strike within Russian territory yet, Operation Spider's Web. Planned by the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, over the course of 18 months and orchestrated in large part by the agency's head, Vasyl Malyuk. This remarkable attack appeared to take the Russians completely by surprise, dealing a devastating blow to air bases and equipment across the country. The attack involved a reported total of 117 drones, which were smuggled into Russia, hidden inside containers that were then loaded onto trucks and strategically positioned near 5 air bases all over Ukraine: Orlenia, not far from the border with Finland, Ivanovo and Diaghilevo, which are both close to Moscow, Belaya, far to the east in the Irkutsk Oblast, and Ukrainka, even further east near Russia's border with China. Once the trucks were in position and the orders were given, retractable roofs slid back from over the drones and dozens of them took to the skies, striking air bases and, according to Ukrainian military reports, damaging more than 40 planes in total. The SBU shared video of the drones in action on X, showing first-person footage of one drone after another striking parked planes. The planes' damage are said to include supersonic Tu-160 and Tu-22 bombers, Tu-95s, which are capable of carrying nuclear bombs and cruise missiles, and A-50 surveillance planes. And according to the SBU, around $7 billion worth of equipment was wiped out across 4 of the bases, with one of the 5 attacks in Ukrainka failing after the truck carrying the drones caught fire. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his pride at the success of the mission, given its scale and complexity. He noted that, of the planes' damage, half of them cannot be restored, and some will take years to repair, if they can be restored at all. He also added that all of those involved in planning and carrying out the mission deep in Russian territory had been safely extracted. Our people operated across several Russian regions, in 3 different time zones, and the people who assisted us were withdrawn from Russian territory before the operation. They are now safe. To make matters worse for Russia, Operation Spider's Web was not the only big attack carried out by Ukraine in recent days. The country also targeted the Kerch Bridge, which famously connects the Russian mainland with the occupied and annexed Crimean Peninsula. It's one of Russia's most prized possessions, costing around $3.7 billion to build. And at an extraordinary length of 12 miles or 19 kilometers, it's the longest bridge the country has ever constructed, as well as the longest in Europe. Russia depends on this bridge to transport military hardware to Crimea and maintain its stranglehold on the area. It allows multiple lanes of traffic to move to and from the peninsula, and there's also a railway line running parallel to the road. In short, it's an integral piece to Russia. Understandably, Ukraine has a different view of the Kerch Bridge, seeing it as a symbol of Russia's aggression and illegal annexation of Ukrainian territory. Indeed, very early on in the war, Ukrainian military leaders vowed that they would destroy the bridge should they acquire the means to do so. Dmitry Marchenko, a now retired Ukrainian Major General of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, stated in June 2022, "The Kerch Strait Bridge is target number 1 for the Ukrainian Armed Forces. This is not a secret either for their military or for our military, neither for their civilians nor for our civilians." And Ukraine has followed through on that claim, carrying out multiple attacks on the Kerch Bridge since the war began, with the SBU once more leading the charge. Explosions rocked the bridge in 2022 and 2023, leading to parts of the road collapsing and putting the bridge out of action for several months. 2024 saw no further attack on the structure, but in the early hours of June 3, 2025, the SBU struck again. The agency's head, Vasyl Malyuk, reportedly planned and coordinated this mission too, which involved planting explosives underwater on the supports of the bridge over the course of multiple months. Then, at 4:44 AM on June 3rd, the first explosive device was triggered, allegedly putting the bridge into a state of emergency and dealing serious structural damage, according to reports from the Ukrainian side. The SBU shared a post on Telegram explaining the attack. The SBU conducted a new unique special operation and struck the Crimean Bridge for the third time, this time underwater. The operation lasted several months. SBU agents mined the supports of this illegal facility, and today, without any casualties among the civilian population, at 4:44 in the morning, the first explosive device was activated. The underwater supports of the supports were severely damaged at the bottom level. 1,100 kilograms of explosives in the TNT equivalent contributed to this. In fact, the bridge is in an emergency state. The agency also shared video footage on X, showing a huge explosion beneath the bridge, and Malyuk also made a statement. God loves the Trinity, and the SBU always brings what it has conceived to the end and never repeats itself. Previously, we hit the Crimean Bridge twice in 2022 and 2023, so today we continue this tradition underwater. No illegal Russian facilities have a place on the territory of our state. Therefore, the Crimean Bridge is an absolutely legitimate target, especially considering that the enemy used it as a logistical artery to supply its troops. Crimea is Ukraine, and any manifestations of occupation will receive our tough response. Reports haven't yet detailed exactly how much damage was done in this attack, or how long, if at all, the bridge will be out of action this time. But it's still another victory for Ukraine, and every bit of damage done to the bridge counts, as it forces Russia to spend time, money and resources repairing the structure, while also delaying or interrupting the flow of supplies to and from the peninsula. But the list of recent Ukrainian success stories still isn't over, and the next event was perhaps one of the most humiliating for Russia since the war began. On June 4th, a source from the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Agency, HUR, revealed to the Kyiv Independent that it had gained access to top-secret data from the Russian aerospace and defense company Tupolev. With headquarters in Moscow, Tupolev was founded in 1922 and has, over the years, designed more than 100 models of both civilian and military aircraft for the Soviet Union and Russia. That includes bombers that Russia has used to launch long-range cruise missiles against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, like the Tupolev Tu-95 and Tu-160. As such, the company has been sanctioned by various countries since the invasion began, but continues to play its part in the Russian war effort. Fortunately, thanks to Ukraine's cyber experts, huge amounts of Tupolev's internal data have now been leaked. According to the source, more than 4.4 gigabytes of data in total were retrieved, which includes private meeting minutes, purchase records, personnel files, and official correspondence. The significance of the data obtained cannot be overestimated. Now, in fact, there is nothing secret left in Tupolev's activities for Ukrainian intelligence. Now, Ukrainian forces know in great detail all about the engineers and other members of staff responsible for maintaining Russia's strategic bombers, including the aforementioned Tu-95 and Tu-160 models. Ukraine could use this information in various ways to potentially target those individuals or discover new ways to counter the bombers. The source explained, "In particular, we have obtained comprehensive information about individuals directly involved in servicing Russian strategic aviation. The results will obviously be noticeable both on the ground and in the sky." As an added insult to injury and a little extra dose of humiliation for Russia, the Ukrainian hackers also replaced the Tupolev website homepage with a picture of an owl, one of the official symbols of HUR, holding a Russian plane in its talons. Now, Ukraine simply has to dig through the stolen data to see what it can learn and how it can turn this acquisition into a strategic advantage moving forward. Meanwhile, Russia not only has to cope with the effects of this embarrassing leak, but must also mourn the loss of one of its most decorated military members. Zaur Gurtsiev, a retired Russian commander, died aged 34 in an explosion in the city of Stavropol in southern Russia. The incident occurred in the early hours of May 29. Gurtsiev had a leading role in organizing and executing airstrikes on Ukraine's port city of Mariupol. A large part of those strikes occurred early on in the invasion, leading to around 8,000 deaths over the course of just 3 months. Some of those killed were innocent civilians taking shelter in what should have been safe spaces like a theater. Despite the brutality of the strikes and their widespread condemnation across the globe, the Russian soldiers involved were celebrated. Gurtsiev, for example, received multiple medals for his contributions to the invasion. He'd also been awarded a prize post as the deputy mayor of Stavropol since retiring from the military, and was surely expecting to enjoy a comfortable life for the rest of his days. Instead, this recent explosion ended his life and that of his 29-year-old acquaintance. The Stavropol region governor, Vladimir Vladimirov, gave a statement on the incident, using typical Russian terms like referring to the war as a special military operation and mentioning Nazis on the Ukrainian side. Our hero, veteran of the special military operation and participant in the Time of Heroes program, Zaur Alexandrovich Gurtsiev, has died. All versions are being considered, including the organization of a terrorist attack involving Nazis from Ukraine. As for Ukraine itself, no official statement has been issued claiming responsibility for the attack. So, even though it's quite likely, confirmation that this was Ukraine's doing remains absent. What has been confirmed, however, is that Ukrainian fighters, resistance fighters to be precise, were behind yet another recent attack on a Russian target. On May 31, the Russian all-female resistance group, Zla shared a post on Telegram, reporting of a successful Partisan attack on a Russian train. It's hot on the rails, and it's not just because of the weather. Operational Armed Forces of Ukraine reports, according to confirmed information in the Mariupol district in the temporarily occupied territory, Partisan successfully blew up a train with cargo and fuel tanks. The train was heading towards the so-called Crimea. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine also shared a post about the incident, stating, "On the night of May 31, 2025, an explosion occurred on a railway station near the temporarily occupied settlement of Yakimivka, Mariupol district, Zaporizhia region. A military train of Russian invaders was blown up. The freight train was moving towards temporarily occupied Crimea. As a result of an explosion on the railway track, the train with fuel tanks and freight cars derailed. The key logistical artery of Muscovites in the occupied territories of Zaporizhia region and Crimea was disrupted." This wasn't as big of a blow as Operation Spider's Web, but it was still a noteworthy success for Ukraine, as Russia relies heavily on trains to transport troops, ammunition, and other important military supplies from place to place to keep up the pressure in key areas along the front lines. By taking out trains and damaging the railway network, Ukraine can cause chaos for Russia's logistics, delaying operations and forcing Russia to waste time and resources fixing the damage and rewriting its plans accordingly. All of these Ukrainian attacks, great or small, take a toll on the Russian army, and with every passing day, Ukrainian forces also continuously fend off wave after wave of Russian attacks in key areas along the front line, as Putin's generals send scores of Russian men to their deaths. It's been difficult, over the course of the war so far, to figure out exactly how many people have been killed or wounded on either side, since both Russia and Ukraine have been accused of inflating or downplaying their figures to suit their own agenda. However, one recent study, which will have sent shockwaves across the Kremlin and wider Russia too, suggests that Russia is on track to hit a shocking milestone this summer, the milestone of 1 million casualties. The damning report, published by the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies on Tuesday, June 3rd, suggests that around 250,000 Russian soldiers have died so far, with over 950,000 casualties in total, compared to around 60,000 to 100,000 deaths on the Ukrainian side and 400,000 casualties in total. It goes on to say that if Russian losses continue at their current pace, with around 1,000 troops either killed or injured on a daily basis, the 1 million mark will be surpassed in a matter of weeks. The report also provides numerous other stats that paint a bleak picture of Russia's prospects of any kind of victory in the conflict, highlighting 4 key areas in which Putin is losing the fight. First, Russian forces have advanced an average of only 50 meters per day in such areas as Kharkiv, slower than during the Somme offensive in World War I, where French and British forces advanced an average of 80 meters per day. This shows just how slowly the Russians are making gains. Each day, 1,000 of its people on average are wounded or killed for just 50 meters of ground. Second, Russia's siege of approximately 5,000 square kilometers of territory in Ukraine since January 2024 has been paltry, amounting to less than 1% of Ukrainian territory, and has occurred mainly in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kharkiv oblasts. While Russia made big gains early on in the war, this statistic demonstrates how much slower its rate of progression has become. At this pace, it would take the country decades to truly win the war. Various military experts agree with that assessment, like Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of the British Secret Service, otherwise known as MI6, who stated in a recent interview with Sky News,
"Their advances on the battlefield have slowed significantly in the last 3 months. At the current rate of progress, it would take them 80 years to conquer Ukraine."
The report goes on. Third, Russia has lost substantial quantities of equipment across the land, air and sea domains, highlighting the sharp material toll of its attrition campaign. Since January 2024, for example, Russia has lost roughly 1,149 armored fighting vehicles, 3,098 infantry fighting vehicles, 300 self-propelled artillery, and 1,865 tanks. Even more noteworthy, Russian equipment losses have been significantly higher than Ukrainian losses, varying between a ratio of 5-1 and 2-1 in Ukraine's favour. So, not only is Russia suffering greater loss of life than Ukraine, it's also losing way more equipment, and every tank, vehicle, drone or aircraft taken out represents huge amounts of money too. The fourth point should concern Putin the most. Fourth, Russian fatalities and casualties have been extraordinary. Russia will likely hit the 1 million casualty mark in the summer of 2025, a stunning and grisly milestone. Putin is attempting to counteract these losses with major recruitment drives across Russia, drafting many young men aged 18 to 30 to join the war effort, and offering one-time payments of up to $40,000 for anyone else who volunteers. But it doesn't change the fact that so many Russian men won't be coming home from this battle, and innumerable families across the nation are mourning the loss of sons, brothers, fathers and friends. And it's not just in terms of soldiers' lives. Vital infrastructure and military hardware that Russia has suffered serious losses of late. The country is also struggling economically under the weight of crippling sanctions imposed by various nations around the world that stand with Ukraine. In the early days of the war, Putin made multiple claims that Russia would withstand or even prosper in the face of Western sanctions, even suggesting that the countries imposing the sanctions would suffer much more than Russia itself. At the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in June 2022, for example, he said, "The economic blitzkrieg has no chance of success from the very beginning. We are strong people and we can cope with any challenge." Well, a few years later, in the face of serious financial strikes, Putin's boastful bluster has been proven incorrect. His country is not coping with this challenge at all, and the so-called economic blitzkrieg is taking a major toll. Lieutenant Colonel Joby Rimmer, a senior military advisor for the UK's permanent mission to the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, paints a very clear picture of the current situation, with proven statistics to back up his claims. Interest rates in Russia have surged to 21%, reflecting deep financial instability. 40% of Russia's federal government spending in 2025 has been committed to defense. For the first time in post-Soviet history, defense spending has exceeded social spending. Russia has depleted 2/3 of the liquid assets in its national wealth fund, and due to international sanctions, Russia has lost an estimated $450 billion in energy revenues. In a nutshell, Russia's economy is crumbling, and it's not hard to see why. The country has spent far more on this war than it ever intended. In the early days of the war, multiple reports revealed that Russia's soldiers, military leaders, and even Putin himself expected it to be over in a matter of days. They imagined that they would stroll all the way to Kyiv, facing minimal resistance and hosting victory parades in the Ukrainian capital in no time. Of course, that didn't happen. Ukraine resisted. Allies around the world leaped to its aid, and multiple countries imposed harsh sanctions on Russia. Putin has since had to spend tens of billions of dollars to maintain the war effort, year after year, including well over $100 billion in 2024 alone, all while losing huge amounts of investment and international trade arrangements. It's now reaching a point where leading economists believe that Russia's entire national wealth fund could run out in a matter of months. And once again, the stats exist to back this up. Russia had $117 billion in liquid reserves in 2021, but had just $31 billion by late 2024. The Russian ruble is growing weaker, inflation is on the rise, and worker shortages grip the nation. And the longer the war goes on, the more Putin will have to spend, and the bigger the impacts will become for everyday Russians just trying to live their lives. There's also something that Joby Rimmer points to in his recent statement, noting how the Kremlin continues to prioritize the war effort over the welfare of the Russian people. The authorities are even preparing to raise gas prices to offset losses at the state-owned energy company Gazprom. This will inevitably make life that bit harder for the population. In turn, it's likely to negatively affect the president's popularity and legacy. And as the oligarchs who support him start to see their own hoards of wealth diminish, they may eventually turn on Putin or even organize a coup to oust him from office altogether. Indeed, the Russian leader certainly can't be in a great place right now after such a rough week. Ukraine isn't just digging in and resisting anymore, it's now striking back with increasingly ferocity deep into Russian territory, wiping out expensive hardware, destroying valuable infrastructure, and even stealing secret information. Added on to the economic devastation and increasingly dramatic numbers of Russian deaths and injuries, this terrible spell for Russia could prove to be a key turning point in the war. Perhaps weeks or months from now, this moment will be seen as the one when the tide truly started to turn and Ukraine began its biggest push for victory and freedom. Now, for more information on recent events, check out our in-depth video on the Crimea Bridge bombing or our detailed breakdown of Operation Spider's Web. And don't forget to subscribe to the Military Show for more trusted news on the Ukraine-Russia conflict and other important events from across the globe.